Looking at the same thing everyone else sees and seeing it in a way no one else before has is just one of the many reasons he took a property that failed almost the day it opened and turned it into the most successful gaming company in Vegas history. Yet, despite all he accomplished, I wouldn't be surprised if you've never even heard of the man referred to by many as one of the most influential in the evolution of Las Vegas. This is Bill Bennett's story. Formal education bored Bill Bennett, despite being very intelligent. It meant so little to him, he didn't even show up to get his high school diploma. He tried community college, but only lasted 1 year before dropping out. After that, he joined the Navy and went to fight at the end of World War II. An example of how intelligent he was when the subject interested him, when Bill Bennett took the Navy's pilot's exam, he did so well, they thought he cheated. So they made him take the test again, this time orally, and he scored even higher. Bill would later credit the discipline he earned in the Navy as one of the core reasons for his success. After the military, Bill began working for a furniture store in Arizona. He studied everything he could about the industry and not only discovered how to cater to a specific market, but within a year, he bought out his boss. Unlike so many who ran businesses, Bill knew better than to think that he had all the answers. He enjoyed interacting with his customers and learning what they wanted so he could give it to them. Within a few years, he ran the most successful chain of furniture stores in the Phoenix area. By his mid-30s, he was married to a former Miss Arizona, had 3 kids, and was a millionaire. He was also a hell of a golfer, near scratch. It was this recreational skill that helped him to meet people like future presidential nominee Barry Goldwater and New York Yankees co-owner and future owner of multiple Vegas casinos, Del Webb. His relationship with Del would later help Bill in his next career endeavor. But before all that could happen, Bill had to experience epic lows to balance out his great highs. First, Bill had marital issues, separated from his wife, and started dating the daughter of his secretary, who was 17 years younger than him and only 5 years older than his oldest daughter. He eventually reconciled with his wife, but shortly after, she was diagnosed with heart issues and died at the age of 32. Of the many questionable decisions Bill would go on to make in his life, the first is probably the easiest to reconcile. Only 9 months after his wife's death, he reconnected with the young woman he dated while they were separated. Less than 2 years later, he married her, a few days after her 21st birthday. Interestingly enough, they were married in Vegas at the Little Chapel of the West, a place that would one day be relocated to the Hacienda, only to be forced to relocate again when Circus Circus Enterprises bought it with plans to build Mandalay Bay. Personal life aside, business wasn't doing well either. Always looking out for his little brother, Bill turned over more of the responsibility of running the furniture stores to him. However, Bill's little brother wasn't nearly as good at his job as Bill was. Couple that with some bad investments, and just a year after his second wedding anniversary, Bill had to declare bankruptcy. Most people will tell you, you need to have at least one really big failure in your life before you can become a huge success. Well, he didn't know it at the time. This was that failure for Bill. Fast forward to years later, when Bill started making money at Circus Circus, he went back and paid everyone he owed money to, even though he was legally released from the obligation when he filed for bankruptcy. Attempting to start fresh and embarrassed by the failure of his furniture stores, Bill moved his family from Arizona to Nevada, where Del Webb gave him and his wife their first jobs in the gaming industry. In the 60s, Del Webb, a successful contractor responsible for the construction of the Flamingo in the Sahara, owned the Sahara in Vegas and in Tahoe, as well as the Mint on Fremont Street. Bill's first job in gaming was in 1965 as the host of Sahara Lake Tahoe, while his wife would work as the casino clerk. Many would look at this as a tremendous step back, considering Bill's past successes, but he didn't look at it that way. Bill liked starting from the bottom, learning the business and working his way up the ladder. Just as he did with furniture, Bill took to gaming and hospitality and learned everything anyone would take time to teach him. He read anything he could get his hands on, set up a blackjack table in the garage at his home, and had the kids help him learn how to deal. He used what he learned about gaming not only to help dealers to identify potential cheaters, but he taught players how to play better. One casino manager complained to Dell about the latter, to which Dell responded, "Well, Bennett obviously knows more about the casino business than you do." Shortly after, Bill was promoted from host to casino manager. Bill continued to impress and move up the ranks. Within a year, Bill moved into the Mint in Vegas and was promoted to assistant general manager. Less than a year after that, he lost the assistant title and took the helm at the property. While running the Mint, Bill met the owner of the neighboring casino, Benny Binion, and the two quickly became friends. It was crystal clear that Benny understood the customers in a casino better than anyone in the business, and for the same reason, didn't mind sharing his knowledge with Bennett. Some say that Benny saw a bit of himself in Bill. That and the Mint was only competition to the Horseshoe in the sense that they both wanted to attract gamblers to play at their property, because the Mint was a grind joint, and the Horseshoe attracted the highest of high rollers in the world. Benny described the layout of a slot floor like a grocery store. The essentials go in the back, so people have to walk past everything else to get to them. He taught Bill about pay tables for slot machines and that you should put machines with higher hold percentages on the end caps because those machines drew the most impulse play. You could also draw people into a casino by putting the busiest machines at the front of the property. In Bennett's second year at the Mint, it made $9 million in profit. The following year, he more than doubled that. Within 5 years, Bill Bennett was the head of all three of Del Webb's Vegas properties. Bill's success attracted the attention of all in the Vegas market, including potentially the most important person of all at the time, Valley Bank of Nevada president, E. Parry Thomas. Bill shared with E. Parry thoughts on how things could be done better in the industry, how pay structures could be improved to prevent turnover. Dell's company did a good job of recognizing talent and developing it, but back then didn't offer incentives or bonuses to employees. Pay was largely all salary, and so talent would often get lured away by competition. Hell, Bill didn't even get a raise when the running of the Sahara fell to him in Vegas. He received no bonus for taking the company from one that lost money to one that generated 7- and 8-figure profits. Conversations like this evolved into the two discussing opportunities for Bill to buy his own property. That's how we met Bill Pennington. By 1968, Bill Pennington had made millions by purchasing seized blackjack machines from the state, putting random number generators in them, a new invention at the time, and leasing them to casinos. Before this, they had something of a predictable pattern, and if you were smart enough and invested enough time to discover what it was, you could take advantage of it. E. Parry introduced the two to each other, and they quickly became friends, despite not having much in common beyond the ambition to own their own casino. Pennington was described as someone you just wanted to hug, while Bennett was very cerebral, logistical, and calculating. The two realized their strengths and weaknesses complemented each other, and wasting no time, Pennington made Bennett a 50-50 partner in his company, Western Equities. Western Equities made roughly $20,000 to $30,000 per day from the leasing of those blackjack machines, but the two knew it wasn't where their future lied. So, with E. Parry's help, the three started looking at opportunities. Deals for the Landmark and Four Queens didn't work out, but in 1974, Thomas encouraged them to save Circus Circus. Jay Sarno was the visionary behind Caesar's Palace and the opulent theme. However, his second concept, Circus Circus, was as much of a failure as Caesar's was a success, pretty much from day one. There are many speculated reasons for Circus Circus' initial failure. Not having a hotel when it opened was definitely one of them, and it didn't help that he charged admission to enter the property, $2 for tourists and $1 for locals. However, possibly the biggest mistake was Sarno's inability to understand the audience his new concept attracted, Middle America. It's important to state at this time, Circus Circus was not opened as a family-friendly casino. In fact, the carnival games tended to reward players with live topless women. By 1974, not only did Jay Sarno want out, but the gaming board did as well. Or at least they wanted new owners so that they could get Tony the Ant Spilotro out, who, it said, used the gift shop at Circus Circus as a legitimate front. Things had gotten so bad that Sarno was not going to be able to make his next payroll. While interested in the property, Bennett and Pennington couldn't afford to buy a property on the Strip. Believing they could earn enough to buy it from all the profits it would make once they took over, E. Parry negotiated a deal for them to lease the casino with an option to buy. The deal allowed Jay Sarno to continue living in the penthouse of the recently built hotel and do pretty much whatever he wanted, including use the amenities. Now, some reports say that E. Parry expected the bills to fail and had brokered another deal for a second owner to purchase the property after they did, and its value had substantially reduced as a result. However, since business in Vegas at the time was done with so little documentation, it's impossible to confirm the validity of such a claim. And considering the integrity with which E. Parry Thomas handled his businesses, it's highly unlikely. When Bennett and Pennington purchased Circus Circus in May of 1974, the buzz on the Strip was it wouldn't last 90 days before going bankrupt. The property was losing $500,000 a month, and the new owners had no cash reserves to fall back on. If the casino had any chance of survival, it needed to make a profit fast. So they removed all the gimmicks. Carnival games were relocated to the second floor, where they are today, and adjusted to cater to children. The aerial acts and animals were kept for the first year while more pressing matters were addressed. All vendors, including Tony Spilotro, were bought out when they decided they wanted to run everything in-house. And the most important decision of all was the one that would come to redefine how business was done in Las Vegas. Their plan not only ensured they wouldn't go under in 90 days, from 1974 until the Mirage opened in 1989, no other property would make more money in Las Vegas than Circus Circus. Bennett had known for a long time that an entire market was being underserviced in Las Vegas, regardless of the fact that it was the largest demographic in the world, the middle market. While the entire Strip focused on attracting high rollers, Bennett decided they wanted everybody else. High rollers can impact your bottom line as much negatively as they do positively if they get a run of hot cards. In the numbers game, a concept more commonly known as the law of averages, playing the percentages over time is how you come closer to those theoretical losses. Bill would often explain his market focus by simply saying, there are a lot more people in the world with nickels than with $100 bills. So they went after the customers that Caesar's Palace, the Dunes, and even Binion's didn't want. The people who lived on a budget enjoyed going to McDonald's as a treat and shopped at Walmart. These customers would come to be known as low rollers, and it was far more advantageous and cost-effective to lure 50 low rollers to Circus Circus with inexpensive rooms, food, and attractions for the kids than one high roller. In fact, those could all be loss leaders. The key to the success of this strategy would be full rooms all the time, and slot machines would be their bread and butter. Slot machines were where the real money was, another concept Bennett figured out before any other casino. The more those slot handles got pulled, the closer you come to the theoretical percentage that those machines will hold. Bennett understood low rollers. He knew they appreciated one-on-one interaction with the owner, as much if not more than a high roller does. He made the effort to not only go around and introduce themselves to the guests, but would ask their opinions, what they liked and didn't like about their stay. And when guests saw Bennett, the owner of a casino, doing something as simple as picking up scraps of garbage on the floor while making his rounds, something he was known to do and enjoy, low-rolling guests found that they were not only able to identify with him, they developed a fierce loyalty to the property as a result. Dr. Dave Schwartz, the director for the Center of Gaming Research at UNLV, said, if the Mirage had never been built, the Excalibur would be the model everyone in the market followed. No one in Vegas history marketed better to those who made less than $100,000 per year than Circus Circus. Understanding that high rollers flew to Vegas and low rollers drove to it, they marketed heavily to roadside billboards and radio ads, making sure people knew that rooms at Circus Circus were nearly always under $20 a night. Bennett also loved doing marketing research and learning what more he could be doing to attract customers. Two of his favorite numbers to review were the numbers of people who had gone through his buffet each day and the slot revenues, because those were their key customers. He listened to his employees when they talked about customer behavior. He would have someone drive through the parking lots of other casinos, making note of all the different states people were visiting from based on where their license plates were from. Periodically, he would have one of his guys go over to the competition with $500 to play slots and chat up people to find out why they decided to patronize the specific property they were in. These strategies were so successful that not only was Circus Circus frequently sold out, but deals were cut with nearby properties to accommodate their excess until additional hotel towers were constructed to supply the demand. Those that couldn't be accommodated at Circus Circus were given discount coupons to encourage them to still patronize the property. This practice virtually invented the concept of casino comps for non-high rollers. Rumors of such high roller-esque treatment to low rollers spread quickly. Bennett was a stickler for the bottom line, and he loved a good deal. He advocated buying in bulk to save money. Once, his food and beverage manager got a great deal on ketchup. Knowing how much Bennett loved French fries and ketchup, he bought 25,000 bottles or more. However, one day, as Bennett was enjoying his fries, he noticed the ketchup wasn't the same that he was used to. Irritated at the situation, he asked why they changed it. Once his manager explained the cost-benefit, Bennett supported the decision. However, asked that his ketchup of preference be available for only him to use. It was also well documented that Bennett loved his employees. His kids would joke that it sometimes felt like their father cared more about his employees than he did his children. He paid close attention to them, knew if their grandparents were sick or if their kids were trying out for organized sports at school. He made notes of their strengths and weaknesses and rewarded those that showed promise. He not only rewarded his executives, but everyday employees as well. This sort of practice would help his employees also develop a fierce loyalty to their boss. Bill enjoyed mentoring those he saw potential in. The Circus Circus management training program firmly believed you couldn't oversee any part of the business unless you were able to perform to the standards the employees in those jobs did. So, the program required you to work every job in the property. Housekeeping, casino cage, valet, craps, blackjack, literally everything. The program could take in excess of 3 years to complete. Bennett also didn't believe in big salaries for potential. Instead, he offered reasonable to low-end salaries with huge bonuses based on performance. If you were good, your bonuses would make you the highest paid person in your position in Las Vegas. Those with a track record of success found themselves with new cars, access to the company's private jet, and various other amenities. He felt that those who helped make the company successful should all share in the benefits of that success. His company's practice was called into question when he took Circus Circus Enterprise public. One banker asked, "Why do you give 15% of your bottom line to your management?" Bill replied, "Because I get the other 85%. Make no mistake, you had to tolerate some pretty erratic behavior to work for Bill Bennett. There are many accounts of Bill yelling from his office for people, then upon entering, would scribble down a note, crumble it up, and throw it at you, then yell at you to pick it up and read it, only to find out you just received a bonus worth as much as your annual salary, and told if you continue to keep doing the work you're doing, you'll get one of those every 3 months. Oh, and the better you do, the bigger it'll get. It was also made very clear that you did not discuss your bonus with anyone, or it would be the last time that you got one." Realizing how serious the request was, but also understanding how hard it would be to keep a check the size of your annual salary a secret from your wife, one employee asked permission to tell his wife. Bill contemplated the request for a long minute before saying, "If you absolutely have to, I guess it's okay, but only your wife, no one else." Bill's philosophy was, he paid his people to do a job right. You shouldn't be complimented for doing your job. And he hated when someone didn't know the answer to his questions. Phrases like, "I'll look into it," or "We're working on it," were not tolerated. That being said, it was better to admit you didn't know the answer, get berated for it, and come back later with the right answer than to give a wrong answer because you were guessing. Being wrong was ultimately worse than making him wait for the right answer. You had to have thick skin to work for Bill Bennett and know when to open your mouth and when to shut it. Bennett was a master at listening, sometimes leaving such long, uncomfortable pauses that people found themselves continuing to talk just to fill the void, and in some cases, saying more than they should have. Bill also had no patience for small talk. One story tells of a time when a slot manager, trying to impress Bill with his ambition and how good he was at his job, told Bill that he was bored and didn't have enough to do. He wanted more responsibilities. Bill responded, "I'll give you something else to do. Go look for a new job. You're fired." He also seemed to have a photographic memory when it came to conversations. And when he found inconsistencies in your statement, could quote them back to you and tear them apart piece by piece. He was a stickler for the details and would challenge you with seemingly insignificant questions out of the blue. Like, what is the sale price of a specific item in the gift shop? Or, are we using fresh orange juice or fresh squeezed orange juice in the coffee shop? Regardless of your answer, he would follow up to see if you were right. He was also a bit of a tyrant who liked to use vagaries to cause unease and shake things up. One story tells of an impromptu meeting that all the top guys in the company had 10 minutes to get to. Once they were there, Bennett explained how disappointed he was with some of the people in that room. He wouldn't call out any specific person or department, nor exactly what the issue was, just that procrastination isn't something that would be tolerated. He gave them all plaques with the word procrastination and its definition on it to put on their desks because he wanted them to see it every day and make sure that they never do it again. Then dismissed the meeting. No one ever found out who or what he was talking about. Another example of Bennett's erratic and irrational behavior comes from a story involving his son. He was working for his father on the slot routes and eventually earned his way up to general manager. One day, he was called into his direct reports office and fired because the property had experienced the largest drop in revenue. Shortly after, while packing his things up, he received a call back informing him that it was an accounting error and that he wasn't fired. A few minutes later, he received yet another call informing him that, per his father's instructions, the company had a policy to never hire a general manager back after they had been fired. And so he was still fired. Bill's son admits if it were anyone other than his father, he could have easily sued the company for this, but he never pursued such legal actions. Bill's success streak continued when he purchased Slots of Fun in 1979. At that time, it was in bad shape. However, under his guidance, and run by one of his proteges, Al Hummel, Slots of Fun paid for itself within a year. They borrowed the idea of inexpensive shrimp cocktails from Golden Gate, sold hot dogs for next to nothing, and offered 50-cent Heineken and Coronas. Hummel admitted it wasn't rocket science, but we had a super friendly and relaxed atmosphere that offered good value, and we packed the place. For a while, it was the best casino in Nevada in terms of the money it generated per square foot. Despite the success and expansion into Reno in 1978, it didn't take long before the Bennett-Pennington partnership started to deteriorate. Bennett began to resent that Pennington had an opinion on how things were done. The way he saw it, Pennington was basically just an investor. Circus Circus was a success because of what Bennett did and didn't need to hear the opinion of the money man. Bennett also didn't approve of the way Pennington seemed to enjoy their success more. Pennington took time off work for vacations and enjoyed some of the finer things in life. Bennett believed life revolved around your work, and he hated vacations. Not just taking them himself, but he didn't like when his employees took them either. He felt he paid you to be at work, not vacation. Animosity between the two became so heated that they made an agreement. Pennington would be responsible for the Reno operations, and Bennett would take everything else. A plan that worked until the Reno property had reached a point in the early to mid-'80s where it became a liability and threatened to damage the Circus Circus brand. So one day, seemingly out of patience, Bennett sent Al Hummel, the man behind Slots of Fun's success, to take over day-to-day operations of the place. To make things even more difficult, Bennett never informed Pennington he was doing this. So when Al showed up and just started taking over things, it made for an awkward situation for all involved. It wasn't easy, but Bennett eventually turned the property around in Reno. However, he never relinquished control of the property back to Pennington. Bennett looked at the situation very much like he was parenting a child. Pennington had his chance to do things his way and failed, so he lost that privilege. Just about everyone who worked for Circus Circus, no matter what property in specific, would tell you it was Bill Bennett's company. It was Bennett who was the one who found and hired the talent, groomed it, put it where it needed to be, and gave them the tools to be successful. It can be argued the reason Pennington put up with Bennett's antics was because he was doing the exact same thing. While he didn't appreciate the way Bennett regarded him, there was no denying that he partnered with someone who knew how to run their company. It's also important to clarify that Bennett didn't dislike Pennington personally. The two were friends. Just about every clash the two had was about how to run the business, which Bennett believed was his department. In 1984, when Pennington got into a boating accident on Lake Tahoe that put him into a coma for several days, Bennett was the first to come visit his friend. Sarcastically, the first words out of Pennington's mouth when he saw his partner was, "What did we hold in slots last night?" Glenn Schaeffer met Bill Bennett through Michael Milken. Yes, the same Michael Milken that helped Wynn build the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City and the Mirage in Vegas before going to prison for insider trading. But don't let that little chapter in his life distract from the fact that the guy was a financial genius. Milken was friends with both Schaeffer and Bennett and saw a great opportunity for the two to work together. As Circus Circus was preparing to go public, it was Milken who suggested that a guy like Schaeffer could help to promote the credibility of the company. Schaeffer had been struggling at Ramada and desperately wanted to be a part of a growth industry. Glenn admitted he was familiar with the company, but not Mr. Bennett, so he did his homework. Gambling, as a business, was just starting to remove itself from being classified as a dirty word to a respectable business model. The closest thing that you could compare the gaming industry to at that time was the movie industry. However, unlike the movie industry, who lived and died from how a movie did, in the gaming industry, once you established your brand as quality, as long as you retained that reputation, everything worked like clockwork. In 1983, Circus Circus Enterprises was one of the first gaming companies to go public. That doesn't mean Bennett and Pennington were comfortable with the concept, which is why they hired Glenn Schaeffer to communicate with potential investors and market their brand to Wall Street. Schaeffer created the term super casino to describe an experience where everything a guest could ever want would be available under one roof. He explained that casinos have invented a new form of theater with their buildings. Schaeffer told investors that the super casino is to tourism what the Pentium chip is to technology. While Steve Wynn used junk bonds to finance the Mirage, Schaeffer got money from investment banks at a time when financial institutions outside of Nevada didn't risk money on casinos. And more than that, Circus Circus was the first casino operator to convince banks to give them low-interest, multi-million-dollar credit lines. When Schaeffer and Bennett started working together, he didn't have a long-term vision for growth. But as he had done so many times before, Bennett put the right people in place to make that happen. If Bill Bennett made Circus Circus a financial success, Glenn Schaeffer made it a household name on Wall Street. It's also said Bill saw a bit of himself in Glenn and often shared stories from his life and how those molded him into the man that he was. Glenn will be the first to tell you he and Mr. Bennett complemented each other. Glenn would also do all the things Bennett didn't want to do, including things a normal COO or CEO would do. For example, Bill didn't like doing interviews, hearing himself on the radio, or seeing himself on TV. He wasn't interested in being the face of Circus Circus, just the man behind it. So Glenn did him for him. In the first year of the company going public, Bennett promoted Glenn Schaeffer to CFO. Now, back in the day, the casino owners would get together to discuss matters that affected all of them, like gaming taxes. Bennett hated going to these meetings. where people like Baron Hilton and Steve Wynn enjoyed standing as the titans of industry. At one meeting, Baron Hilton asked Bill what he thought of a legal situation. Bill replied, "I don't know. That's why I brought my legal counsel here with me." Not long after, Bill got tired of being in that meeting, excused himself, and informed all in attendance that whatever his guy decided is what everyone else should do. By the late 1980s, Bennett had put together arguably the most talented team in all of gaming. At the peak of its success, the only real competition to Circus Circus Enterprises was Steve Wynn and the Golden Nugget Mirage. Next on the agenda, build a better, more profitable Mirage for less money for the low roller. They would call that project Excalibur. Excalibur opened in 1990, costing $300 million to build, or roughly half what it cost to build a Mirage, with close to 1,000 more rooms. It was profitable the minute it opened and paid for itself in 2 years. Within a year, Excalibur became Circus Circus Enterprises' most profitable casino, earning $85 million before taxes, giving investors 30% return. However, calling the Mirage and Excalibur competition would have been foolish. They attracted the exact opposite clientele, which only helped to further grow the Las Vegas market. Only 15% of Americans ever visited Las Vegas before the Mirage and Excalibur opened. 6 years later, that figure doubled. At some point, Bill Bennett became an insecure person. At times, he admitted to Glenn he wished he had been born with his intelligence. Schaeffer would often argue Bennett already had it, clarifying an education wasn't the same thing as intelligence. Some say that with Bennett's work ethic and intelligence, he was the kind of guy that you could have put in any business and would have been a success at it. At first, Bennett was very supportive of his guys getting recognition for their efforts. An example of that is when his guy, Bill Paulos, won Casino Executive of the Year in 1990, shortly after Excalibur opened, which Paulos was running. When Paulos was informed he was nominated, he was honored, until he learned the other two people nominated were Steve Wynn and his boss, Bill Bennett. Paulos panicked and called Mr. Bennett, apologizing, clarifying he isn't worthy of the award and that all his success comes from Bennett's tutelage. Bennett replied, "It's fine. We've got a 2 out of 3 chance of beating Wynn." He also went on to reassure that the award is an honor for the company, not just the individual. When it was confirmed that Paulos won, Bennett told him, "Congratulations, you deserve it." However, it was around this time that Bennett started to become increasingly paranoid, and it began to impair his judgment. Around 1990-91, Circus Circus was in the early stages of planning Luxor. While they had just opened Excalibur, the largest hotel in the world at the time, it was still designed to attract the same crowd Circus Circus did, the low roller. Luxor would be Circus Circus' attempt at upgrading their image. It was also during this time that it became known that Bennett was dealing with some serious medical issues, specifically the circulation in his legs and feet. This was a direct result of the years of exposure he had to toxic airplane glue while enjoying one of his favorite hobbies, building model airplanes and helicopters. To combat his pain, Bennett often over-medicated. Feeling himself slipping, he jokingly told Schaeffer that he was going to give himself a pay cut since he wasn't having a good year. Those he had handpicked and mentored all considered Bennett like a father to them. And like those with Alzheimer's or MS, it was painful to watch someone so brilliant and capable slowly slip away. On his worst days, it was said that Bennett would take 20 Percocets a day. He also started drinking a lot. The office developed a report system, warning if it was a good day to go to him or if you should stay clear. Bill Paulos was the general manager at the time, so he was in a lot of meetings with Bennett, where it was common for Bennett to nod off. He would intentionally sit next to Bennett in meetings so he could give him a kick under the table to wake him up before anybody else noticed. Paulos admitted that while it made sense for him to attend a lot of business trips with Bennett, it became apparent that he may have been selected because he was one of the only key people who was willing to drink in the morning with his boss. Bennett knew he had a problem. He tried to hide it by only using Donald Duck orange juice in his screwdrivers. Because of the viscosity of the brand, it hid how much vodka was actually in the glass. He said, never use Tropicana because it gets lighter when the drink gets stronger. Donald Duck holds its color, and Bennett felt it was no one's business how strong his drink was. The cover of the Gaming Journal seems to be the defining moment that things started to go downhill. In 1990, it featured Steve Wynn and Glenn Schaeffer, labeling them as the most important faces on the Las Vegas Strip. A copy of that magazine sat on Bennett's desk for several weeks, like an omen that something bad was coming. Especially because Bennett didn't keep anything on his desk that didn't involve current business. It seemed to signal that taking pleasure in the successes of the guys that he developed was no longer good enough. The man who previously had no interest in being the face of the company became annoyed that Schaeffer had become it. In Bennett's mind, it was because of him that Schaeffer got to go to Wall Street to build the Circus Circus brand. Bennett was the reason Schaeffer was a millionaire. And if anyone should be the face of Vegas next to Steve Wynn, it should be him. Something Schaeffer and many actually agreed with. What's most disappointing is other than doing his job to the best of his ability, none of this was Glenn's fault. He had no idea about the magazine, wasn't interviewed for the article, and didn't pose for the picture used on the cover. And the fact remains, when Glenn Schaeffer came to Circus Circus, it was a company that generated $240 million a year. 10 years later, it did billions. Some believe the resentment surrounding this was largely based on the fact that Bennett wasn't fit to be seen or make good business decisions at the time. For example, in the early 90s, in the gaming industry, companies that were looked at as leaders in the industry were looking to move into locals markets like Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri, who had recently legalized gaming. However, Bennett wasn't interested in local markets. Some believe it's because the further away a property is, the less in control Bennett felt. And at this point in his life, it felt like everything was slipping from his control. Previous to all this, Schaeffer had been given the freedom to do whatever needed done to grow Circus Circus into one of the premier gaming companies in the world. Feeling creatively stifled, Schaeffer admits he started to contemplate moving on to a company that wanted to do what was necessary to continue to grow. He was eventually talked out of quitting, but Glenn would compare the next several years with Bill Bennett to the final years of a marriage leading to a divorce, every bit as painful as the one he had had with his wife. Around 92-93, while the Luxor project was in full swing, Bennett started showing all the signs of someone losing it. His whole personality was changing, all for the worse. He became paranoid, depressed, and forgetful. On Bennett's bad days, it was almost like he had Alzheimer's. He would rip people to shreds for no apparent reason. He would forget what he had asked you to do, ramble in meetings, taking the conversation in directions that had nothing to do with what they were talking about. Those close to him tried to protect and rally around him, despite the way that they were being treated. Everyone knew Bennett was in pain and under a lot of stress, as Luxor was the biggest property he had ever attempted to do. They all felt they just needed to get him to the finish line. That was the Luxor grand opening. His secretary could tell pretty early on in the day if he was having a bad or a good one, and would come up with reasons to cancel meetings or have anyone see him. In a casual moment of conversation, venting their frustrations to one another, senior leadership, including Bill Paulos, Mike Sloan, and Glenn Schaeffer, all agreed the company was in decline. They also all agreed it was because of Bennett. When word of this conversation and others like it got back to Bennett, it basically sealed their fates. The news that Glenn Schaeffer was leaving Circus Circus in early 1993 came as a surprise to the entire industry. Bennett would tell people the reason he fired Glenn Schaeffer was because he'd been disloyal, never more specific than that. Schaeffer left the company while they were really rushing to open Luxor because Bennett promised a specific opening date so he could open before Steve Wynn opened Treasure Island. To give you an idea of the competition going on between the two at the time, Wynn told someone while he was building Treasure Island, he was doing it to show what Excalibur should have looked like. Bennett reached out to longtime gaming and former Wynn executive Clyde Turner to replace Schaeffer as CFO. Clyde had just left the gaming industry and started a construction company when Bennett came calling. Bennett told Turner that if he came in and took Schaeffer's position, that he'd be CEO 6 months later because he was planning on retiring within a year, despite not wanting to. Bennett couldn't have made the transition any less uncomfortable than he did. Turner literally moved into Schaeffer's office while Schaeffer was grabbing the last of his things and leaving. One of the first things Turner learned on the job was Wall Street seemed to believe that Bennett had turned the company over to Schaeffer. It isn't clear if this is because Bennett had stopped having anything to do with that part of the business, or if Schaeffer insinuated it. Before the first stockholder meeting after Luxor opened, which was also the first meeting without Glenn Schaeffer running it as CFO, Clyde Turner could sense that Bennett didn't feel good and was irritable. In the middle of Clyde's presentation, Bennett cut him off and told him not to say anymore and just ask for questions. But Clyde did. However, all the questions were for Bennett, and he couldn't answer any of them. Those on stage became embarrassed. Bennett would make excuses, claiming he couldn't hear, arguing that the air conditioning fans were too loud. All while the rest of the panel tried to do whatever they could to answer the questions for Bennett, feeding him information, but it was awkward to say the least. In a board meeting that immediately followed, Bennett said he only wanted the outside directors in the room, which would have excluded Clyde and Mike Sloan. Clyde wasn't in the mood to argue with Bennett, but Mike Sloan spoke up, informing that what he was doing was illegal. You can't exclude members of the board of directors from a board of directors meeting. Regardless, the meeting went on without them. In that meeting, Bennett told all in attendance that he wanted to fire both Clyde and Mike and wanted the board to do it. However, the board was fed up with Bennett and instead told him he had to give up the title of CEO. It was so apparent that Bennett needed to go that longtime board member and Bennett's best friend, Art Smith, was the one who asked for Bennett to step down. And so the man who built the greatest gaming empire in history had to have it taken from him so he didn't destroy it. For Bennett, this was a declaration of war. Revenge became the only thing on his mind. His mission? Buy another property and run Circus Circus into the ground. First up, while still a member for the Circus Circus board of directors, he went for the hacienda, partially because it was for sale, partially because he knew it would neighbor with his new enemies, but mostly because he knew they wanted it for the next planned project, Mandalay Bay, known as Project Paradise at the time. As a member of the board, Bennett was already well aware of Circus Circus' plans to purchase the property. He was informed if he didn't immediately cease and desist, the board would have to sue him. Bennett thought about taking the case to court, but the plans were well documented and he knew he could never win. So in 1994, he resigned from the board of the company he helped create and began looking into what other properties were available for him to purchase. He considered buying Bally's, but in 1995, eventually settled on Sahara, a nostalgic choice as it was the first property Bennett managed on the Strip. Sahara would be the vehicle he would use to show everyone that the success of Circus Circus was due to him. At $150 million, even though it included 26 acres south of the property, home to Wet n Wild Water Park at the time, he paid about double what it was worth. The previous owners had given up taking care of the Sahara. They stopped replacing light bulbs, stopped putting in air conditioning filters, the kitchens didn't work, and while the Sahara did have good bones, they were all for things Bennett never placed any emphasis on. It had a large convention space, but Bennett hated conventions and thought they were a waste of time for the biggest market. Sahara was known for its showroom entertainment. Again, something Bennett never put much stock in. He immediately announced plans to expand the casino and add nearly 1,000 rooms. But the only thing that ever actually materialized was a new pork ashore and the addition of the NASCAR Speed World attraction. His family would say they wish Bennett would have just called Luxor his swan song and retired. At the age of 71, Bennett wasn't in the physical or mental shape to run a property. On his best days, he wasn't a shadow of the man he used to be. He would forget down payment deadlines and depending on the medication he was on, might forget which hotel he had just bought. Those close to him tried to protect him from himself at Sahara, but employment was unstable at best. Most people didn't last any longer than 18 months, because when you attempted to stand up to Bennett, or even help him see why what he wanted was not a good idea, you were simply fired. Various concerning practices and antics eventually caused the Nevada Gaming Control Board to get involved. His daughter spoke to them, revealing Bennett's health problems. For all he'd done for the city in gaming, the board was very understanding. However, once word got back to Bennett, he would set up unrealistic and unattainable goals for his daughter, knowing she wouldn't be able to reach them, and thus providing the excuse he felt he needed to fire her. Despite all this, the Sahara was actually making a profit for a time under Bennett. He went to work at the Sahara every day up until a month before he died in December of 2002 at the age of 78. The last 5 to 10 years of Bennett's life were spent in constant pain. The official diagnosis was peripheral neuropathy and would lead to needing his toes, feet, and eventually both his legs amputated, all while continuing to work 18-hour shifts at his property, often in a wheelchair. Towards the end, Bennett even got physically abusive with his longtime wife. Regardless, she never left his side or called in a full-time nurse. After Bill's death, the family eventually sold the Sahara to Sam Nazarian for about $300 million, who in turn turned it into SLS. Make no mistake about it, Bill Bennett was a genius, a true pioneer in gaming. While history will forever glorify the legacy of Steve Wynn and Kirk Kerkorian, Bill Bennett is the reason Las Vegas is as popular and diverse as it is today. Before him, no one in Vegas seemed to care about the majority of people who listen to shows like ours. While some argue things have changed for the worse or lament for the days of old when tuxes and gowns were required attire for an evening in Vegas, Bennett saw that it was a place that should be enjoyed by all. While he never cared much for self-promotion or the kind of attention Wynn embraces, ultimately, he did want credit for what he did. While historians recognize him as one of the most important figures in the city's history, we honor his memory by making sure you, the listener, diehard lovers of Las Vegas, know this as well.